When it comes to the GameCube, one of the most highly praised games on the console goes to Retro Studios' Metroid Prime. Completely changing the landscape of what players had grown accustomed to with the series, Retro Studios broke the convention of seeing the character on screen and rather having players relate with Samus by seeing it all through her eyes. The game was a massive hit both critically and commercially for the GameCube, and went on to spawn a sequel on the GameCube and a final installment in the trilogy on the Wii. For years, we've known about Metroid Prime 4 in development, at first with Namco, and 2 years later scrapped, and development had been handed back to the original developers over at Retro Studios. With the recent Nintendo Direct announcement that blew the minds of Nintendo and Metroid fans alike, the long-rumored arrival of Metroid Prime for the Switch has not only come to fruition, but has been completely remastered. In this episode, I want to showcase the differences between the GameCube original and the new remastered version. So, sit back, relax, and let's dive into this comparison video. So immediately, right from the main menu, there are some differences to note here. Upon pressing start on the GameCube version, you are brought right to the file select screen, showing where you left off, what percentage completion you're at, and how many hours your playthrough has been so far. Additionally, the Metroid Fusion connectivity option at the bottom allowed players to connect the game via the GBA cable upon completion of both games. And you can unlock the Fusion suit in Metroid Prime and unlock the NES version of Metroid to play on Metroid Fusion. When pressing start on the remastered version, you are brought to a more traditional main menu per se, where you can choose to play the game, which brings you to the file select screen, as well as access the options and the extras. The extras is somewhat similar to the gallery found in the GameCube version, except with far more unlockable content. You can access a concept art gallery, a character gallery, and a soundtrack gallery, and playing through the game will unlock more pieces within the gallery to check out. When accessing the file select screen here, the UI does look slightly different, if not spruced up with a small graph next to the percentage complete and the time played, and it still shows which location your save data left off at. Additionally, there is a casual mode added this time as well. One last thing to note here is that the main menu on the GameCube version runs at 30 frames a second, whereas the remastered version is at 60 frames a second. Alright, let's get into the game itself now. From the opening intro, you can see right away that there is far more definition within space itself. Even Talon 4, seen in the background, has an insanely sharp amount of texture work detail happening here compared to before. Seeing Samus' ship flying in, you can see there's an extra layer of shine and overall polish, and even from this upper shot, you can now see there's more definement on the ship itself. As for Samus, her green visor and chest plate have a substantial amount of additional detail, yet more visible to see Samus' face a little bit more too. Once in the visor, the first thing you'll notice is that the heads-up display looks slightly different between both versions. On the original version, it'll state energy on the top center of the HUD, which is reminiscent of the original Metroid games. On this remaster, that word has been removed and instead is replaced with predefined slots for the energy tanks that you'll collect throughout the game. Also, on the bottom left where you see the visor selection, the scan visor location has been changed from left on the D-pad in the original version to right on the D-pad in the remaster. Not going to lie, this one kind of messed with my muscle memory quite a bit. The other aspect is the upper center part of the screen that shows Samus' helmet using less real estate space on the remastered version versus the original GameCube version taking up just a little bit more space. Not that the original version took enough space to feel like you couldn't see as much, but it does provide a bit more perspective in the remastered version. Other than these, all the icons and overall UI look pretty much the same, just slightly tweaked a bit. It still looks very relatable and authentic to the original version that became an iconic view. Also, speaking of views, when in ball form, I noticed that there's more screen real estate on the remastered version here versus the original having the black bars on the top and the bottom where the UI was in the top part of the screen. Exploring the space station here, I was very impressed to see just how drastic the lighting has been revamped. A perfect example is this massive dead parasite that is lit on fire. In the GameCube version, there is more of a general area for the flame near the creature, but in the remaster, the lighting and the flame are dramatically different and provide a much darker tone for what awaits in the space station. Even on the elevator here, the sparks from the grinding cogwheel and lighting are far more dramatic and immerse you further. Another aspect to point out, despite how minor they may be, are the computers in the background. They easily could have neglected these, yet they've updated these heavily as well. That's quite the attention to detail here. Now, one aspect to note are the doors. One of the developers formerly at Retro Studios that worked on this game actually pointed out that the doors have been changed and lost part of its character in this remaster. He was actually one of the devs that created the doors in the original game and its animation, so that's completely fair of him to be critical of this change since that wasn't his vision. However, I do want to note that he did praise everything else he saw in this remaster outside of that one thing. Next is the Parasite Queen boss. Right away, you can see that the texture work was heavily reworked in the remastered version, and this boss looks even more ferocious than before. The force field around the boss is also more defined and looks even more fortified than before. During the escape sequence, I noticed this one part where the large metal piston tries to crush you. On the remaster, you can see the fire and ember texture work showing that the metal is heavily grinding the walls and has a lasting effect. On the GameCube, there's just a little bit of it visible at the very bottom of the piston. Again, it's these little details that show how meticulous Retro Studios was when going back to remaster this. Another thing I noticed was the text written when scanning these computers to deactivate turrets has changed a bit. In the remaster, it says auto turret disabled. In the GameCube original, it says perimeter defense turret disabled. It's a minor change, but one that I did notice. Now, the cutscene shown here where Samus sees Meta Ridley is one that made me go, wow, this looks amazing. The dynamic lighting is in full effect here, and seeing the detail on Ridley's eyes is wild. Take a look between the two versions here. One more section I want to point out is when Samus loses her armor. In the GameCube version, it kind of flashes and then disappears, but on the remaster, you actually see the pieces fading apart with some additional effects. After getting out of the space station, Samus flies into Talon 4 and lands within the overworld. Here is where we begin to see even more drastic differences. Foliage is far more dense here, the terrain itself is significantly richer, and the geometry has been heavily increased from its original version. Here, take a look. Pretty drastic, huh? Also, did you notice the audio sounded a little bit more enhanced than the remaster clip? There are more ambient audio effects and channels in effect here, it seems. Next is this waterfall here, in which the water as a whole looks incredibly inviting, and the GameCube original does look a little bit more low res when close up. However, one thing I want to note here are the weather effects. So, in the GameCube version, you could see the rain bouncing off of Samus's arm cannon, but on the remaster, you can see the rain not only bounce more aggressively off the arm cannon, but you'll see it run down it as well. More impressively though, is that the rain will run down the cannon based on the direction you are facing, whether at the sky or looking down at the ground. This attention to detail is on another level. Again, things like this may seem minor, but when they implement visual effects like this, it truly adds more immersion than you realize. I also tried firing the arm cannon rapidly to see the steam effect come into play here from the GameCube version, and the remastered version actually has some subtle smoke coming out of the cannon instead. Which look do you prefer? Also, the charge beam got a nice upgrade too, in which you can now see the energy charging up within the beam itself, almost like a Tesla lamp. The energy emanating through the arm cannon also has a more natural flow this time around. Exploring the Chozo ruins, I noticed something was a bit different at one point. The suit had narration.
Data received.
I never realized that in Europe and Japan, there was objective narration that was missing from the North American GameCube version. They've added that in this remaster, which is a nice addition. However, if you're a purist and want that turned off, you can do so in the options menu. One area in the Chozo ruins that really stood out to me was this corridor here, which continues to showcase the dynamic lighting happening. I couldn't get over how stunning the lighting looked from this creature here that's scouting back and forth. Going to a later point in the game, the Magmoor Caverns have a far more dramatic feel to exploring those fiery caves thanks to the dynamic lighting in play here. While this was always a cool looking location in the GameCube original, here is how it looks in the remaster. You can see that the lava itself is more organic looking. Upon leaving Magmoor Caverns, you reach what many consider one of the best locations in the game due to the music, Phendrana Drifts. Here is where I was in awe, and if I wasn't in awe already with this remaster, here's where it struck even more. When comparing both the GameCube and remastered versions, it looks like the remastered version has a photorealistic appearance to it. Take a look. Overall, the visuals in this remaster truly are mind-blowing. The attention to detail is exquisite, and there's a labor of love Retro Studios put into their studio's first title, bringing it back after 20 years of its launch. But that's not all. Let's talk about one more aspect, the controls. Metroid Prime had a very unique control setup on the GameCube. At a time where FPSs were using dual sticks to move and strafe and look around with the right analog/C stick, Metroid Prime had you move and turn with the analog stick, and the C stick allowed you to change beams on the arm cannon. To look around, you had to hold down the R trigger and use the analog stick to aim. As odd as it sounds, it actually worked really well. When the Metroid Prime trilogy released on the Wii in 2009, Metroid Prime got the control treatment that Metroid Prime 3 received, in which you can move and strafe with the analog stick and aim and look around pointing at the screen. It was a control scheme that perfected FPSs on the Wii. Now, with this remaster, Retro Studios has redone the controls to allow for dual stick style controls like a traditional FPS. But they also brought back the Wii style motion controls by using the Joy-Cons. Additionally, the classic GameCube control style method is here, and there's also a hybrid option where you can have the GameCube style controls, but holding the ZR button to start aiming and then moving the controller to actually look and aim around. Every control style here works flawlessly, but more importantly, Retro Studios has finally perfected motion aiming with the Joy-Cons. Where many developers tried this and fell flat, Retro Studios has proven that motion aiming can work very similar to the Wii's IR sensor pointer aiming. It's amazing how fluid and responsive this control scheme is on the Switch, and I cannot recommend this style enough. However, I do want to stress that the dual stick method that's new in this version is another excellent choice. Overall, no matter which control setup you use, they all work flawlessly. Metroid Prime Remastered may have drastically increased the visual fidelity of the GameCube original, but let me stress this. The GameCube original still looks fantastic and was a huge achievement for the console. Here was this massive game that ran at 60 frames locked with rich detail and scope. It speaks volumes about the game's art direction being superb when it released 20 years ago, and it still looks amazing today. However, seeing what Retro Studios did with this remaster shows the studio still has a way of raising the bar. While they are also working on Metroid Prime 4, I do feel this was a good way to showcase an idea of what we can expect in the next Prime installment, whether it be for the Switch or a launch day title for Nintendo's successor console. That being said, I know there are still plenty I could sit here and compare between versions, but I feel at this point you have a clearer idea as to how much this version improved upon the original. So, what do you all think? Did you pick up the remaster? Are you getting the physical release in less than 2 weeks? Sound off in the comments below, as I'd love to hear your thoughts. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will catch you all in the next episode.
you.